When you're looking for an electric scooter, you have to be really careful because, if you get the wrong electric scooter, you might get something that's too slow, or you might end up pushing it home because you bought one that didn't have enough range. But when you're looking for an electric scooter on Amazon or Best Buy, how can you tell a good one from a bad one just by looking at the specifications? You could go watch scooter reviews on YouTube, but what if you can't find one? This video will make you an expert on telling the good scooters from the ones you really don't want, just based on the specs. I'm Paul Somerville, and for the last 5 years, I've spent more than 10,000 hours riding, testing, and reviewing electric scooters. You'll usually see me on Electric Scooter Guide, but welcome to my brand new channel where I give you behind-the-scenes takes on what's good and what's not so good about electric scooters. In this video, I'm going to try to teach you everything I know about electric scooters in about 15 or 20 minutes. Some of it will be stuff that you know already, but even if you're an electric scooter expert, I guarantee you're going to learn something new. So just skip ahead when you need to. I'm going to cover pretty much every scooter specification, including which specs are the most important, which specs you should never believe, and little known facts like the #1 spec that gets quoted in electric scooter reviews that doesn't mean anything at all. Let's start with a spec that gets a ton of attention, and that's top speed. I've personally speed tested over 150 electric scooters, and I've got some good news. For scooters that go less than 40 miles per hour, you can usually trust the specification for top speed, and the reason for that is those scooters are firmware limited. The company that made the scooter has decided how fast they want it to go, and they're just not going to let it go any faster than that. For example, in the United States, the Ninebot Max G2 is limited to 22 miles per hour, and they do that for safety and also for range. But if it weren't firmware limited, the Ninebot Max G2 would probably go about 28 miles per hour. High-speed electric scooters, on the other hand, routinely miss their specified top speed. The worst offender I've seen was the Visette 11 Plus Super 72. It was specified at a top speed of 65 miles per hour. It showed 72 on the speedometer, but actually went 54.9 in a scientific two-direction speed run. If you want to know the real top speeds of the most popular electric scooters out there, go check out the ESG website or the Electric Scooter Guide website, and they've got a ride finder there, and you can sort by top speed and find like the real tested top speeds of just about every scooter you'd be interested in. But I've got some good news for you, is even if ESG hasn't tested it yet and you can't find the real top speed numbers, it kind of doesn't matter. Speeds above 40 miles per hour aren't very useful other than for bragging rights. I never find myself in a situation where I want to sustain a speed faster than 40 miles per hour. So if your scooter really goes 55 or really goes 65, it kind of doesn't matter that much. To really ride around on 10, 11, 12-inch tires at 40 miles per hour or above is kind of scary, and it's going to kill the range of your scooter. So to make sure you get a scooter that's fast enough, pick how fast you think you really want to ride, add 5 miles per hour to that, and you're going to be pretty safe choosing a top speed by the specs. All right, let's talk about range next, because that's like the next most important spec that people are interested in. The #1 thing you need to know here is you cannot trust the range specs by the manufacturers. They're not trying to lie to you. It's just these are the maximum ranges in eco mode, and they all kind of had to do it because as soon as one manufacturer lists the range as the maximum range in eco mode, they kind of all have to follow suit, or they look like they don't have as much range as everyone else. Once again, if you want to know the true ranges, the range you're more likely to get because you're going to ride around in sport mode, because that's what you paid for, go check out the ESG site, the 178 or so range tests that I've done, and we typically see scooters go between 60 and 90% of their specified range on the hill-covered ESG range test course. In fact, the average of all of them, if I average all of them together, was about 68% of the spec range in the real world. The problem is you can't know which scooters are going to be the 60% of the full range and which ones are going to get 90%, and that's why it's so important to have real test data, and that's why I love the ESG test database. I go and look at it myself all the time. But again, if you're interested in a scooter that ESG has never tested, there's another workaround. Find the battery size for the scooter that you want to buy, and then go to the ESG site and find a scooter that has the same battery size and has roughly the same top speed, and those two are going to have the same range to within about 10%, and that's going to get you close enough. Or if you want the very easiest trick to make sure you get a scooter with enough range, just go pick one that has basically double the specified range of the furthest you think you'll need to ride. So for example, if you need 10 miles, go buy a scooter with a spec range of 20 miles and you're going to be pretty safe. Something I'm very excited about is companies like Segway Ninebot have started specifying specifying the range in each of the modes. So they'll tell you what you'll get in eco, sport, drive, whatever the modes are. And I found that they've been actually super accurate, in fact, even a little bit conservative on the new ZT3 Pro. And all of this discussion leads us into the next most important spec, which is your battery size. And this one can be super, super confusing because a lot of the time people talk about battery size in amp hours, but that doesn't tell the whole story because the true capacity of the battery is a function of amp hours and the voltage of the battery. And if you don't know both of those things, you can't really know how big the battery is. Or just look for watt hours, and that's going to tell you exactly how much energy the battery contains. But I'm going to tell you how to get there if you only have a couple of the numbers. So when you find the spec for the battery's nominal voltage and then the battery's amp hours, you got to multiply those together and you're going to get watt hours, and that is a number you can just compare across the board to any scooter. A lot of the specs are in amp hours, and let me show you an example of where comparing battery sizes using amp hours doesn't work at all. If you have a scooter that has a 13 amp hour battery and it's 36 volts, but you've got another scooter that has a 10 amp hour battery that's 52 volts, you can't compare those directly. You might think the 13 amp hour battery is going to be bigger, but it's not. Actually, in this case, the 10 amp hour battery is bigger once you multiply everything out. 13 amp hours times 36 volts is 468 watt hours. 10 amp hours by 52 volts, of course, is 520 watt hours. So there you go. The smaller amp hour battery in this case has the larger capacity, but just always look for watt hours. That's the real number you want to compare. If you can't find the watt hours, find the nominal voltage of your battery. It's usually going to be something like 36, 42, 48, 52, 60. Multiply that by the amp hours of your battery to get watt hours. So next up is motor power, and this is the most important sounding spec that means nothing. Nothing. I've tested scooters with 500 watt motors that beat scooters with 1,000 watt motors. And the reason why it doesn't mean anything is that the motor spec is just kind of how much power the motor can handle. And it's like if you have speakers at home that can handle 100 watts, they're not going to be louder than speakers that can handle 50 watts. Unless you drive it with more power. It just means they're capable of accepting more power, and even that spec is kind of a fuzzy one. So how can you know a scooter's maximum output? Well, you've got to look for a spec called peak power, or better yet, find out the maximum amps that the motor controller can push out, and then the maximum battery voltage, multiply those together, and you're going to get something close to the maximum peak power that the scooter can make. For example, the Nami Burn E Max electric scooter has controllers that push 55 amps each. And the battery, which is 72 volts nominal, when it's fully charged, makes 84 volts. So if we multiply 55 amps times 84 volts times 2 motors, what we get is 9,240 watts of peak power. The more peak power, the stronger the acceleration, the better the climbing is going to be, and generally the higher your top speed as well. More often than not, a scooter's peak power is going to be about double the nominal power, but it varies a lot. And to give you a good benchmark for which scooters have how much power, the Ninebot Max G2 is kind of right in the middle, and it has a peak power of 900 watts to 1,000 watts, depending on what country you're in and which generation of firmware. That's enough power to get you up most hills without needing to push. But if you double that to 2,000 watts of peak power, you're going to be able to climb most hills without slowing down. If you double that to 4,000 watts, well, now you're into sports scooters like the Visette 10 Plus that'll accelerate all the way up most hills. And if you double that into 8 or 10,000 watts, now you're into hyper scooters like the Cobble Wolf King GT. Okay, so those are all performance-related specs, but what about the safety and reliability-related specs? Should I care about being UL listed? Well, many scooters, in fact, more and more every day, are becoming UL 2272 certified, and what that means is that they are certified for safe charging. They passed a whole bunch of standards ensuring that you can plug it in, charge it, and not worry about it bursting into flames. Now, we've had hundreds and hundreds of scooters at ESG. We've never had any trouble with them. Most of them were not UL listed, but all things being equal, being UL listed is certainly better. And in places like New York City, you can't even buy a non-UL listed scooter anymore, and a lot of apartment buildings won't let them inside. So in 2024, would I buy a non-UL listed scooter? Yeah, I would still buy one. But all things being equal, if I had two scooters that have the same price and same specs and I couldn't really decide which one I was going to get, I'm going to go with the one that's UL listed. So what about water resistance ratings, or IP ratings? What do they mean? Are they real? Are they made up? IP ratings come in the format of IP and then two numbers. For example, IP54 is a super common one. The first number is for dust, and the second one is for water resistance, and that's the one that you really care about because dust isn't really going to hurt your scooter. To give you a benchmark, most motorcycles are rated IP65, which means they're basically dust proof and can handle strong sprays of water from any direction. Most scooters these days are rated IP54 to IP66, but there's a catch. These are mostly self-certified, and you can't trust all of them that they really went through the certification process. And so in the meantime, while things are still evolving here, it's really better not to take your scooter through deep waters, not to ride it in downpours. None of the scooter companies cover water damage under their warranties, though you can usually get away with light rain and stay out of the deep puddles. Unfortunately, it's a very much splash at your own risk sort of situation. So let's talk about tires. Tubed or tubeless? Do I care? Yeah, you kind of do. And here's the big difference is tubeless tires are more resistant to certain kinds of flats, but they also tend to be harder to change than tubed tires. And unlike the tread pattern on your tire that you can change from off-road tires to road tires, but you can't generally change a scooter that came with tubed tires to tubeless tires because they use different types of rims. Most modern scooters now come with tubeless tires, and some tubeless tires even have sealant built in to help them resist flats even more. Another type of tire, solid or semi-solid tires, are the most reliable because they absolutely can't get a flat because they don't have any air in them in the first place. But the ride quality isn't quite as smooth, they have less traction, and they tend to wear out a bit faster. So now I'm going to talk about something that usually isn't on the spec sheet, and that's split rims. Some scooters have rims that split down the middle to make tire changes easier. In the past on sports scooters, you typically get split rims with tubes or tubeless tires and solid rims, but you typically wouldn't get both tubeless tires and split rims because split rims don't seal in the middle. But just to make things extra confusing, there are just a handful of new scooters out there like the eMove Roadster and a couple of Dualtrons that now have split rims and tubeless tires, which is the best of both worlds, and they do that by putting an O-ring in the middle of the split rim to help those two seal together, and then the tire makes the seal around here, and you get a tubeless tire with split rims. And that's the best of both worlds, but also very, very rare, so you're really unlikely to find scooters that have that feature. What about tire diameter? Well, when it comes to ride quality, larger tires have a smoother ride. The standard tire diameter these days is 10 inches. But there are also a lot of great scooters out there with 9.5 and 9-inch tires, and so don't rule those out. Smaller, more portable scooters have tire diameters that go down as small as 8 inches, and then the big powerful scooters are usually running 11-inch tires, or we're even seeing some 12-inch tires show up these days. And again, bigger tires means smoother rolling and generally more traction. So how important is charging time? Well, it really depends on how you're going to use your scooter. If you're going to ride it to work and you're using almost all the range to get there, then you really care about the charging time between when you get to work and when it's time to go home again. But something to keep in mind is the spec charging times. That's how long it takes to get from empty to full. You're not usually running your battery all the way down. But here's something fun. Charge time, even if it's not listed in the specs, is pretty easy to calculate. If you have a 10 amp hour battery and you have a 2 amp charger, it's generally going to take 5 hours because you just divide the amp hours by the amps of the charger. It's going to get you close enough. Then if you have a scooter with multiple charging ports, you can use 2 chargers at a time and cut your charging time in half. And there are usually aftermarket fast chargers available that will charge your scooter even faster. Just make sure you don't charge in less than 3 hours and you won't hurt the battery life at all. All right, what about rider weight limit specs? How strict are those? Well, so most smaller scooters are spec'd for 220 pounds. But what, if I weigh 225 pounds, are the wheels going to fall off? What's going on? No. So mostly what they mean there is that if you weigh more than the rider weight limit, you're going to have trouble climbing hills. And so that's something you want to watch out for. If you're close to the edge of that spec and you have a lot of hills in your life, maybe pick a scooter with a higher weight limit or that's got dual motors. These specs are really there to help you avoid being disappointed with the scooter, but just to be safe, don't go jumping off curbs if you're right at the weight limit. What about the weights of the scooters themselves? Is that a spec that you can trust? Not always. At ESG, we always weigh the scooters, and some of them are really, really far from the spec. The worst offender was the Wolf King GT Pro. It claims to weigh 115 pounds, but it actually weighs 125.4, and 10 pounds, that could be a meaningful difference. When that situation happened, I bought a whole second scale so we could calibrate the one that we have, and all the scales checked out. It was just way heavier than spec. In addition to the weight, some scooters are very awkward to carry. So find out if the scooter's stem latches down to the deck, because some scooters like the Wolf King GT are just impossible basically to carry upstairs on your own. What about suspension? Do I really need it? How big of a deal is suspension? Well, suspension makes scooters heavier, larger, and more expensive, but it can really smooth out your ride. And it's such a big subject, it really kind of deserves to have its own video. So in this one, I'm just gonna have to recommend that you watch a bunch of reviews and then weigh out how much do I care about portability and how much do I care about ride comfort. There are many, many scooters with suspension and without suspension that I really enjoy riding. riding for different reasons. This last one gets into the finer details, but some scooters have square wave controllers and some have sine wave controllers, and you usually don't see this one on the spec sheets either. Sine wave controllers generally give you smoother throttle control, quieter motors, and more range, but having sine wave is no guarantee of any of these things. And conversely, there are a lot of square wave controllers that actually perform really well on all of these counts. But just in general, sine wave is gonna be smoother than square wave. This spec mainly becomes important when you get into scooters that go faster than 40 miles per hour, and some of those can have great throttle control whether they have sine wave or not. But in general, again, sine wave is going to be smoother. Okay, so we've covered a lot of stuff. As always, the more research you do and the more reviews you watch, the happier you're going to be with whichever ride you choose, because you're going to know what to expect. But I hope this video has really helped you become your own electric scooter expert. And if you have any friends that are looking for electric scooters right now, forward to this, and hopefully we can help them on their journey to find the perfect scooter for them as well. Thanks so much for watching my first full-length video on my own personal channel where I help you discover all the juicy details about electric scooters. This is Paul Somerville, and not ESG this time. Don't ride like me, but do always remember to wear a helmet. Go check out the Electric Scooter Guide website because they've got all the specs for real-world performance data on all the most popular electric scooters. Thanks again, guys.